Okay then, so we've installed our first Vue project using the Vue CLI, and it's created a shared load of files and different folders for us over here on the left. Now, I know when you first start, this can be quite daunting. It was for me, but honestly, we're not going to need to do anything with most of these files. A lot of them are configuration files that we don't really need to worry about. But the ones we do need to understand, I'll walk you through in this video. Now, fair warning, this lesson will probably be one of the more complex lessons of the course. So don't feel bad if you have to watch it over a few times to wrap your head around it, because I know I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. But once it does click, the rest of this course will follow on so very easily from it. Now, to begin with, what we'll do is try running this current setup, this boilerplate project, in a browser. Now, to do that, we can check out the README file. And remember, it said to get started, first run npm install. We did that to install dependencies. Then we can run npm run dev. So let us do that. We'll say npm run dev. And make sure you're in your project directory. I'm in my project right here. So if we press enter now, what this is going to do is spin up a development server, and it's going to send us this index.html file in the browser. Now that's come up on a different screen for me, so I'm just going to zoom it over here so we can see that. And we can see this logo right here of the Vue logo and all of this information down below. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Okay then, so now what we're doing is we're running this index.html file in the browser through a local development server, listening to port 8080. So when this index.html file reaches the browser, Vue.js is kicking in behind the scenes and taking control of the whole application. So let's see how this all works. And we'll do that by looking first of all at this index.html file which is being served up to us. So first of all, we can see this div with an ID of app right here. Now, this is a hook for Vue.js to reach in and take the reins, if you like. Now, the script tag right here is pointing to a dist folder and to a build file. Now, this folder and this file doesn't actually exist yet. We can't see it anywhere over here. So what's going on? Well, remember, when we compile our project on completion, Vue is going to bundle up all of our Vue.js code that we write into one file, and it's going to put that in a dist folder into one single file called build.js, which is this one. Now, we've not done that yet, but while we're running the dev server, which we are doing at the minute, what Vue is doing is looking at this file right here, this script tag, and it's running the same code that would make up this JavaScript file as if it had been compiled behind the scenes. So even though it's not been compiled yet, everything still works the same way. This is one of the benefits of working this way with this dev server and the Vue CLI. Now, this whole compiling process will make much more sense when we come to build and deploy one of our applications, so we'll see more about that later on. But where is all of this Vue code that's controlling the page coming from? Well, we know that ultimately it's being compiled into this file right here, but where is it before compilation? Where are we writing this code? Well, that's all in the source folder. So let's have a look in here. And this source folder is where we're going to be doing about 99% of our work throughout the rest of this series. Okay, so first of all, you can see we have this assets folder, and this is where we can keep all of our static files such as images. The current logo is there that we saw on the web page a minute ago. So then we have the main.js file right here. Now, this is the main file for starting our application. This is the initial place where Vue.js kicks in and starts to take control of the index file. Now, at the top, what we do is we first import Vue.js. So, like in the previous chapter, we had a script tag in our HTML file which loaded in the Vue library. Here, what we've done is actually install Vue, and it's in the node modules folder, then import that module up here at the top of this file. So this is how we're importing Vue into this file to begin with. Then what we're doing is importing this thing, which we'll come back to in a minute. Now, much like we did in the previous chapter, we're making a new Vue with some different options. Now, what we're saying here is which element that we want this instance to control. And we're saying we want this instance to control the app element. So down here on the index, remember, we have this app element. So now we're telling Vue over here, where Vue first kicks in, that we want it to control the app element. Okay? We also specify this render property right here, which is taking this thing, this app over here, and rendering it to the template. Now we'll talk about this in a little more detail shortly. So think back when we used a CDN to install Vue. We had our own app.js file where we created a Vue instance like this, and we told it to control the app element just like this. Now in our previous setup, if we wanted to edit the template, we'd do it directly in the HTML file. So directly in here. We'd go in and we start adding some different template code in here, right? But now, because we're asking Vue.js to control an entire application, there's likely to be a lot more HTML code than before, far too much just to start writing it all in here. So now what we do is we split our HTML code up into different files, and these files are called Vue files or Vue component files. And then what we do is we take these files, and this is one of them, and we render the template of that file into this thing right here, okay? So that is what this thing is doing right here. We're importing the app Vue file, okay, from /app.vue, which is this thing. And what we're doing is we're taking that app and we're using this inbuilt function from Vue.js, and we're rendering the template from the app to this thing right here. So instead of writing it directly, now we're writing our template in a separate Vue file, a Vue component file, and then we're taking that component file, the template from it, and we're rendering it to this section right here via the Vue instance like this. So we know now that we're separating our templates into different Vue component files. So let's take a look at those files. So you'll notice first of all that they have a .vue extension. So this is the way of saying, look, this is a Vue file or a Vue component file. So let's open it and see what's inside. So we have the template right here at the top, and notice it's in a template tag. This is the way we say, look, this is the template that we want to use for this component or this Vue file. This is what we want to render. Okay, so all of this stuff is the stuff that you're seeing on the web page because it's all been taken and putting inside this app thing right here, right? So when we view this in a web page, if I just scoot this over here, all of this stuff, this is the template which is defined right here in the Vue file. One thing to watch out for when creating a template inside a Vue component file is that there must be only one root HTML template inside this template tag. All right, so notice right here we have this template, then we have one div inside it. And this div is closed off right here. So this is one root HTML element. Now, if we try to add in another, I'll do another div tag right here and say test. First of all, you're going to notice that we get squiggly lines. And secondly, when I saved this, it had a problem running our application. You can see all these errors down here, and we can see this big error screen on here. So it really doesn't like what we've just done. That's because we have two root elements nested inside this template right here. We can't do that in Vue.js. Each component file like this, each Vue file, must have a template with only one root HTML element inside it. Now inside that element we can have as many different sibling elements as we want. We can do what we like in there, but the initial root element there must be just one of inside the template tag. Now if we scroll down a little bit further, you're going to also notice this script tag right here, and inside that we have something that looks a little bit like another Vue instance with our data inside. Now this is not a Vue instance, it's a component, but we can still attach data and methods to it in the same way. And the idea is that this component right here will contain all the data and methods which are relevant to this HTML template. Okay? So notice that we're exporting this JavaScript object right here. Okay, we say export default, then this object. So this allows it to be imported, this component, to our main.js file over here. That's what we're doing. We're importing that component object right here and then using it to render our template to the browser. Now, finally in the Vue file, we also have this section down here, a style tag, which is a few different CSS styles for this component. So we know now that this Vue component file is made up of 3 parts. The actual HTML template at the top, and that's the stuff that's rendered in the browser. Then we have this JavaScript object right here, which is exported and then imported into the main.js file. We have that as well. And that contains different methods and data relevant to this template. And then finally, the third part, we also have some CSS to style this template. So then when we export this component, we're importing it into the main.js file and then taking the HTML template from that component file and rendering it inside the app element right here, okay? So I hope that all kind of makes sense, how that's working behind the scenes. So what's the whole point of this extravagant setup, and why do we use all of these different files like these Vue component files? Well, ultimately the idea is to create several Vue files like this, not just one. And I'll be calling these files components from now on. And each component will represent a different part of the app. So we might have a component for a header, a footer, or a component for a login panel. And what we're doing is splitting up our app into logical components so that we can work on each component individually when we want to. And then as well, depending on how our user interacts with our application, we can show different components and their respective HTML templates in the browser. So this component right here, app.vue, this component is called the root component and is always rendered to the browser, since what we're doing in a Vue instance right here is rendering that component. So that's always being rendered, okay? You're always going to see this app.vue file over here in the browser. We don't need the same template. We can change this template so it's different, but it's always being rendered to the browser. So that's why it's called the root component, right? It sits at the root of the application. So when we create more components, such as one for a footer or a header or a different page, what we'll do is we'll nest those components inside the template of this root component, and we'll look at that later. So feel free to watch this video again just to see how all of this is working behind the scenes to render ultimately our template to the screen. And then in the next video, what we'll do is talk a little bit more about this object down here, this component object. Okay? In particular, you'll notice that this data thing right here is a little bit different than what we did in the previous chapter. Before, it was just an object. Now, it seems like it's a function. So what's going on there? We'll take a look at that in the next video.